Viewers often ask what my favorite DiveSAGA episode is, and for me it's the one that I feel finally shaped the DiveSAGA channel into the underwater storytelling series that it is today. So let's let this podcast live up to the true meaning of its name, and let's debrief that amazing dive at the 2000-year-old sunken Roman city of Baiae. This is the DiveSAGA Dive Brief podcast, and I'm your host, underwater filmmaker and scuba instructor trainer, Nick de Rooder. Because this episode of the DiveSAGA Dive Brief podcast is directly related to one of our YouTube episodes, you should absolutely make sure to subscribe to the DiveSAGA channel on YouTube and maybe go check out that episode before or after you listen to this podcast. I will put a link in the description and in the comments. It is absolutely worth checking out this sunken Roman city underwater, available to scuba divers. Still one of my favorite dives to date. About a year or so ago, there was this trend online suggesting that men think about the Roman Empire several times a week. If I'm not mistaken, I think it was something like wives or girlfriends asking their husbands or boyfriends how often they think about the Roman Empire, and then they were supposed to answer something like 2-3 times a week or 4 or 5 times a day. I for one believe it, because I think about the Roman Empire at least once per day. This dive lives in my head rent-free, and I think it's still one of the best dives I've ever done. It's not a complicated dive, it's not a deep dive, it's barely a dive at all. It's like generally around 4 or 5 meters, 12-15 feet. It's not particularly spectacular in its execution, and some parts of it could even be a snorkeling trip. But for me, the dive at the Baiae Marine Archaeological Park in Italy has been pivotal. I had been building the DiveSAGA channel for a few years, skippering between gear reviews, photography tips, training content, and the occasional dive travel. But on this dive in Baiae, I felt that I was doing something that I really wanted to be doing, diving into history. And so in this episode of the DiveSAGA Dive Brief podcast, I would like to look into that dive, talk a little bit about some core facts about the dive site, about the history of that place and its discovery, and also explain to you how you can go and dive there, and if interested, how you can film it properly. Let's maybe start with some core facts about the place. So this dive site is located in the town of Baiae, which is in the Gulf of Napoli, or the Gulf of Naples. And so it's a submerged Roman city at about, I think, minimum depth is 4 or 5 meters. The deepest you could find is probably 10-12 meters deep, but we didn't even make it that far. So it's very, very diveable, even for recreational divers, and you can even take snorkeling tours there. Often it's called the underwater Pompeii, because just like the city of Pompeii that was covered in ashes and destroyed by the Vesuvius volcano, and we'll talk a bit more about that later, this one is also a very preserved Roman town. It didn't suffer the exact same fate, even though it is very close to Pompeii, but you can see remnants of Roman buildings, streets, and statues, so super, super intricate. And for the last 20 years, the Italian government has allowed dive operators to run dive excursions there, and for divers to really literally dive through history in a very controlled manner. Quick thanks to our sponsor for today, which is In-Depth Magazine. In-Depth isn't about gear hype or clickbait, it's about real dive stories, real explorers, and real underwater science. If you enjoyed this podcast, you'll probably love the kind of long-form articles and photography they publish, as they also cover these types of unique dive sites and underwater stories. You can find In-Depth Magazine online or in print, and by supporting them, you're helping keep serious dive journalism alive. surf to www.indepthmag.com and start reading and learning for free today. So before we can really talk about the dives themselves, it's important to understand what this place even is. Baiae was basically a luxurious resort town of the Roman Empire, a little bit like a old times Las Vegas or Monaco, where the Roman elites had their villas. So Julius Caesar, Nero, Claudius, they all had their villas there, and so this town was famous for that. It was famous. It wasn't just like a Roman settlement. It was very much a luxury seaside resort, which is cool because it means that you have a lot more decadence and a lot more ornate findings there, such as very intricate mosaics. You can find exotic pieces of marble there. So, for instance, we were pointed to slabs of marble that verifiably could only have come from Greece, even though, of course, this town is in Italy. There's also bathhouses there because the city of Baiae sits on some thermal springs. And so you can even see the layered structures of the thermal baths. They used basically hot steam from the underground to heat up the floors. So they had layered floor structures, and you can still see all of that, which makes it incredibly interesting to dive there if you like that type of thing. But indeed, the city sits underwater. That's because Baiae sits in the Campi Flegrei, which is a highly active volcanic area. As I mentioned earlier, the Vesuvius volcano is nearby as well. And in this case, the city wasn't swallowed by ashes, just like Pompeii or Herculano, but it was sank due to a phenomenon called bradycism. So maybe a little bit boring, but important to understand. Bradycism is a geological process where essentially the ground rises and falls because of volcanic pressure. So imagine that basically the whole town was built on top of a gigantic magma chamber that's breathing over the course of centuries. So over the course of centuries, the land there will rise and fall. And since it was, of course, built on the coastline and so really close to sea level, over centuries, this piece of land simply slowly subsided into the sea, submerging the Roman buildings. So it was not the result of a spectacular incident like Pompeii, but rather just a very, very slow decline, as the Roman Empire itself also slowly declined. A real consequence of that is that because of that, it's of course not spectacularly deep, as I mentioned earlier, just a few meters, a few feet underwater. But it also means that eventually it is expected that this town, this village, will eventually resubmerge. And that's pretty crazy. We won't live to see the day because this is a process of centuries. But it does mean that eventually those ruins will be walkable once again. But for now, of course, they are only diveable. And so for divers, that's pretty spectacular. As a diver, you can actually swim through the streets. So maybe the most, I think, spectacular element in Baiae is the mosaic floors. And these are authentic, they are real, massive and very intricate mosaic floors. Black and white mosaic mostly. And they are covered with volcanic rocks, rubble. The dive guides, every morning, first dive guide sort of clears a few mosaics, and then divers throughout the day can admire those. The last dive guide of the day tries to cover those up again. Supposedly, the volcanic rubble protects those mosaics from the elements. But that means that if you're willing to rise up a little bit and go a little shallower and look down, you can get real nice clear views of massive intricate mosaics, but you can also see the foundations of the buildings around them. Don't expect tall structures. Don't expect entire houses, but in most cases, about a half a meter, like 1.5, 2 foot high, little foundational walls can be found. And so it's very easy to imagine the buildings, the rooms, the streets, the doorways of the town. In some places you can also see, it's not exactly cobblestone, but you can see streets, looks a bit like cobblestone, and you can see statues. It is worth noting, though, that the statues are not the originals. They were suffering immensely because they're obviously not entirely covered. And so they were removed, placed in a nearby museum. And then what they did was they made exact replicas of the statues and placed them in the exact same location. What's cool about them is that they didn't try to improve on the statues or restore them. They really made casts. Let's say if half a head was missing, if a hand was missing, they simply replicated it like that and placed it back like that. And so because of that, some of them are sticking half into the sand, which makes it really dramatic and makes it feel very real. Of course, would it be nicer if these were real statues? I guess so. But I think it's also fair that to think that probably there could be a little bit more accidental or purposeful vandalism if people would kick those on accident, or if people would try to collect things. So I get the idea of replacing those. But the fact that you can dive through this town, go in and out of buildings, again, even though they are not fully enclosed, roam through streets, look at statues. I think this is probably one of the only places on the planet where you can literally float through a real ancient Roman city. There are some notable underwater sites there that are a little bit famous. Villa dei Pisoni, for instance, is a massive seaside villa that's linked to a Roman conspiracy against Emperor Nero. The Nymphaeum of Emperor Claudius, that's what I focused on mostly for the episode. It's a submerged banquet hall decorated with statues, as I mentioned earlier. And so Nymphaeum is literally the seaside retreat, let's say. Portus Julius, an important Roman naval harbor. Didn't really get to cover that in the episode. But it means that by now they've mapped it so well, and they've detailed it so well and researched what everything probably was. And that's what makes it super cool, and I'll get back to that later. But it means that you can literally link everything throughout history and link it to famous Roman historical figures, which I think is super powerful. As I mentioned earlier, just across the Bay of Naples is the famous volcano Vesuvius that destroyed an actual Roman city. So in 79 AD, Vesuvius erupted catastrophically. I think this is probably one of the most well-known and well-documented volcanic eruptions of such cataclysmic scale. You can visit Pompeii as well. Little pro tip, there is also the town of Ercolano, which is, I think, slightly lesser known, but maybe a bit more intimate to visit because it's lesser known. There's less people there, but it's essentially the same idea. So here you have entire houses, entire buildings that you can go into. You have petrified human remains, which is pretty gruesome, because thousands of people died here as the Vesuvius volcano erupted and as the ashes came down onto the city. What that means is that those towns are frozen exactly in time. I think this is known enough. If you haven't heard about this, look it up. It's absolutely crazy, but it does mean that indeed at 79 AD that place was literally petrified. As I mentioned earlier, Baiae was not destroyed by that eruption because it's on the opposite side of the bay, so it didn't suffer the same fate, but it of course pairs really well. And of course the Vesuvius volcano is there because it sits in the Campi Flegrei, it sits in the same area, so it's all connected of course to that underground volcanic activity. But again, as mentioned a few times, Baiae was not, I want to stress that because it's important to get these historical facts correctly, Baiae was not swallowed by ashes or whatever. It was simply swallowed by, I guess, what's called geological subsidence, and so swallowed by the sea as it slowly sank. The ruins of Baiae were not discovered like in a single dramatic discovery either. So just like it didn't sink in a single dramatic event, it also didn't suddenly necessarily get discovered. I think it's important to understand that as there, of course, was fisherman activity in the region basically forever, people knew that there were ancient structures under the water, but for some reason they weren't systematically studied. That probably has to do with the fact that, of course, scuba diving is only something that really started happening in the mid-20th century. And so it's not until then, in the 1940s, 1950s, that Italian archaeologists began diving there and noticing those Roman marble statues and architectural fragments that were sticking out. And in the 50s and the 60s, and as scuba diving became more commonplace, they started really doing the first surveys of the area. So it's a place that really revealed itself very, very, very slowly, which also probably explains why maybe it wasn't so urgently studied, because I think nobody really knew probably the scale of the findings that they were going to do there. And so as they started diving in the 50s and 60s, they started finding those marble statues, started recovering them as well. You can find old footage of that. It's very dramatic. That's also when they started dredging and digging and finding those villa foundations, and then a little bit lower, the mosaic floors. They started mapping it. They started putting the road structures together and whatnot. And as I mentioned, it's not until 2002, so that's really not that long ago, 24 years ago, that the Italian government officially created the Underwater Archaeological Park, which made it a protected site, but it allowed for a regulated scuba diving, which I still to this day find something so incredibly brave of the government. It would be very easy or almost logical, I would say, to say, okay, we did massive archaeological discoveries here, we're going to close this off, and some governments definitely would do that, but the Italian government said no, as long as it's structured and we can regulate it, we're going to allow scuba diving here for the public, which of course for us is amazing. And so today it is indeed a park, and it has multiple dive zones with villas, baths, statues, even harbor installations all spread across. And that's amazing. Again, like I said earlier, I think it's the only place in the world where you can actually dive in a town that is that old. So if you want to dive there, how does that work? It's a little bit tricky, I would say, because you have to start from the town of Baiae itself, and that's a little harder to get to. So Napoli or Naples is probably the biggest city nearby, and that's easy to fly into if you like looking at Italian cities. It's a bit of a you have to learn to love Naples, I would say, but it's a really cool place, I think. From there, you can either, if you're adventurous, you can drive, of course. You can rent a car and drive to Baiae. Just be aware that traffic is a little bit challenging there. Or you can take a train. There's actually a train straight from Napoli to Baiae. I did that. I will say, though, with scuba diving equipment on the train is also not necessarily the easiest. Also because the train station doesn't stop exactly nearby the harbor. So you have to go down some steps and whatnot. So it was a bit of an expedition, but it worked out well in the end. And it is also important to know that only guided dives are allowed there. So you're not allowed to, let's say, rent scuba cylinders and just go diving. That's part of the regulation that makes it possible in the first place to dive there. You cannot go off alone, go shore diving as maybe you would elsewhere. But that's probably for the best. Also, at the same time, I think going with a regulated dive center that knows the place, that can show you the best parts, it makes perfect sense. If I dive there, I would like to learn something, right? I would like to know what I'm looking at. So having a dive guide who can give you all that background information makes perfect sense. I went with Baiae Diving Center. This is not a plug. There are other dive centers there, but they definitely provided great service. What was really nice, and maybe other dive centers do that too, but we got a real sit-down in-office briefing with a slideshow with detailed pictures about the sinking and the finding of this place, which I think is well worth it. If you're going to dive it, to me, the real allure is not just in the physical items that you see, but is of course in understanding what they mean and how they came to be. Yes, they are beautiful mosaics, but I think it's the background story of what it all is and how it all ties together that makes it really worth it. So if you're ever in that area, this is 100% worth putting on your bucket list, especially if you're a diver. But, and that is again nice, even if you have non-diving travel partners, they can go snorkeling, and on a good visibility day, they will have a near similar experience to the scuba divers. Filming it was fairly straightforward. Like I said, it was not a complicated dive. In the episode, you can of course see that I'm in a dry suit. That was not even necessary. I just happened to be traveling with that at the time. But I think depending on the time of the year you go, a decent wetsuit will absolutely do the trick. It's not a technical dive. It's not an overhead dive. It's not a wreck dive per se, as in there's no penetration of any kind. So that keeps it very simple. A few tips that I would give: if you're at all able to use anything better than an action camera, if you're shooting this, then I would. The action cameras are great, of course, for the wide shots, but as you know, or maybe don't know, if you try to do anything closer than, let's say, a meter from your subject, 3 feet from your subject, the focal distance of a action camera usually can't handle that. And so if you want to get nice details of the statues, if you want to get nice details of the close-ups of the mosaics, you're probably not gonna get the sharpest, cleanest images. So if you have something with a better lens, a DSLR or something with a variable lens, shoot with that. Where maybe in some other environments like wrecks, where it's all about wide shots, here it's definitely a bit more about close-ups. So I think that is something to think about. It is a very shallow dive, like I said, around 4 or 5 meters, 15 feet. But it is still worth, I think, bringing 1 or 2 nice video lights. Again, if you want to get nice close-ups of the statues, if you want to get clean shots of the mosaics, it can definitely help. Visibility is a bit hit or miss. We were there on a very mediocre visibility day. It definitely wasn't the endless vis that you see in some of the famous pictures, but we definitely still were able to make it work. And maybe a last tip, if you want to go there and film it, is I would get a private guide. That's what I did. You pay a little bit more, at least with, as I mentioned earlier, Baiae Dive Center. That's possible to get a private guide. Because if you're diving in a group, you're always, of course, going to have people in the background and whatnot. And I think having clean backgrounds, clear views of those mosaics without too many people in the picture, being able to shoot those statues without too many people passing by in the back is probably really worth it. It was worth it for me. So if given that option, I would absolutely do that. The whole point is that this, to me, is my favorite episode. It's the one that shaped the way that I tell stories on the DiveSAGA channel. And that realization came during the dive. I knew what it was. I knew what we were going to see. But when I saw it, when we were actually in the water, it just clicked in my head of sort of how old and unique this actually was. And I'm a cave diver, so we dive in structures that are millions of years old. But the fact that this is man-made and that this, like the mosaics, for instance, it's such a labor of love, or probably a bit more of slavery. But point being, it's human beings, spent days, weeks, years on their knees puzzling that together in a time that is so long gone that it really, I find it a very intense emotional experience to be able to dive so up close to something that is so old and so far removed from us, yet it's right there. The fact that you can fly through history, and the fact that you can literally, it's almost like you're an eagle soaring through the sky, soaring through an ancient Roman town. Yes, you can visit old Greek or Roman cities, but you don't have that same three-dimensional spatial interaction, I think, that you have with scuba diving. Especially there's one room, and it's in Emperor Claudius' Nymphaeum, where there is a room full of statues. And so there's, for instance, a statue of Claudia, who was Claudius's daughter, but she died at a younger age. There is a statue of Antonia Minore, which is the great-grandmother of the infamous Emperor Nero, who set Rome on fire. So once you start looking into that, and if you have a good dive guide, or if you're willing to do a little bit of research, you can draw all those lines between family ties, and it's a whole story that tells itself as you are diving there. And to me, that's the moment where I knew this is what I want to be doing. This is the DiveSAGA channel. These are the type of historical stories that I want to find in our dive sites and that I want to recreate. So if you have not seen that episode, by all means, I'll put a link below. Go check it out, have a look. Try to get swept away by it. I know some people say they absolutely don't care for it, so that's fair too. But if you are into history, if you're into the Roman Empire, for instance, check it out and look it up. It's so incredibly amazing. I still think about that dive at least once per day, and it's been almost 3 years, I think, since I've done it. And so a question I get very often about the DiveSAGA channel is, how do I build a scuba diving YouTube channel? And that's probably a topic for another time, but I think that finding your niche is incredibly useful in that. Yes, scuba diving can be a niche, but I think it's not niched down enough. Whether you want to do gear reviews, training tips, or dive travel, I think it's important to figure out what that is. I will give you a little word of warning though. In my case, it ended up being something like underwater history meets storytelling, but it's actually an incredibly expensive niche to produce. I think what a lot of people often get wrong about the DiveSAGA channel is that it's somehow profitable. It really isn't. I have other side incomes that finance this whole endeavor. So that is something to perhaps think about. Although I am incredibly grateful that on that day, in that place, I found the thing that makes me most passionate about scuba diving and about underwater filmmaking. It's worth being honest about that it is perhaps the most labor-intensive and financially and resource-intensive niche, but maybe that's a topic for another time. This was the DiveSAGA Dive Debrief podcast for this week, an actual dive debrief, a little bit into a real episode, and for me, again, the most pivotal one, the one that really shaped the DiveSAGA channel into the way it is right now, although it will, of course, continue to grow. I want to thank In-Depth Magazine for sponsoring this episode. Go check them out at www.indepthmag.com and start reading for free today. Thank you guys for listening, and I will see you next time on the DiveSAGA Dive Debrief podcast.